Hey everyone, it's Ryan Landau from Purpose Jobs. I'm pumped to have you join us for our video series, Finding Balance. Work-life balance continues to rank as a top priority for job seekers. So I'm sitting down with some friends to talk about how they balance work, life, and everything else going on. I hope you're a little inspired from today's episode. Enjoy. Alex, thank you so much for joining our video series, Finding Balance. So great to have you. I know a ton about you, but Alex, do you mind just like setting the foundation? Who's Alex Simmons? Where do you come from? Your background? Give us everything.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Ryan, and great to chat as always. Yeah, so my name is Alex Simmons. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Boon, which is it's a personalized one-to-one coaching platform for employees. So it's a B2B service that is offered to employees of organizations. And the idea is that it's personalized coaching that's really sitting at the intersection between mental health and professional development. And so what we've really found in today's world is that as work life and personal life have become more intertwined than ever, the idea of separating your mental health from your professional growth has become more and more difficult. So our whole thesis at Boon has been, how do we provide an integrated solution where people can really invest in themselves personally and professionally in one seamless way? And so we started the company in August of 2019. We're based out of Detroit, Michigan. Company's remote. We have over 200 coaches on our platform today, and we actually launched with our first customer in the heart of the pandemic. So really interesting time to see kind of the evolution of the workforce today. But a lot of what I'm doing ties right into this idea of finding balance.
Cool. I love it. Just out of curiosity, I mean, you could be doing anything with your time. Why did you decide to start a company? And two, why did you decide to start a company in this space?
Yeah, so I actually came from a more of a finance background, which is kind of the antithesis of your mental health in certain ways. And I think for me, when I was working in investment banking back in 2016, that was kind of the first time that I saw where, working 80 to 100-hour work weeks in investment banking, super stressed, anxious, burnt out, all of that sort of stuff. I ended up getting introduced to therapy and coaching and meditation outside of the workplace. So there was what I found was that first I had that my own experience had a tremendous impact on my own life. Kind of went back into the workplace at the time and realized that all of my colleagues were going through something very similar to what I was. Everybody was burnt out. Everybody was stressed. And my company at the time, which is a pretty progressive employer by all means, 1,000 employee organization, but the way that they were supporting us was through what was called an employee assistance program, which was my first time ever hearing about that. Came to find that that's how roughly 80% of all companies support their employees' mental health and just overall well-being. But EAPs are really more designed to be a crisis management solution. So they're really meant to be more of this end of the line care for employees when they're going through things like substance abuse, divorce, suicide ideation. Here is this counselor, will put you in touch with somebody. And I basically looked at that and saw from my own experience how many resources were out there and just how approachable this should be to the modern day employee. But there was just such a stigma around it, and there really was such a void in how in being able to provide a resource like this. So that was kind of my first foray into, okay, there has to be a better way to do this. And
Yeah.
I really felt like there was going to be a great deal of demand for these sorts of services as well.
I love it. Just out of curiosity, right? You mentioned that you have about like 200 coaches.
Yeah.
Curious if you ever like catch up with them or just like gather any insights. Like what are maybe this is a simple question, but like what are people feeling right now as you're like hearing from like all of these coaches across all of these different companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And something that we're tracking every single month is just like, what are the broad themes that are being talked about in the
Yeah.
coaching sessions? Obviously, everything is 100% confidential, but we're able to see what are the top 5 themes across mental well-being, professional growth, communication skills, you name it. I think one of the big things that we've really seen in recent months is just really great deal of stress and anxiety around the current uncertainty that's in the world right now, whether it be economic uncertainty, political climate, geographical climate, whatever it may be right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the
Yeah.
world. And how do I build resilience to get through that adversity? And how do I do that on a day-to-day basis? How do I think more bigger picture? And there's really been a lot of that. And then the other big thing that we've really seen is that a lot of the businesses we're working with today are in some combination of remote or hybrid work environments. And we've really seen just a lot of communication challenges with those businesses and how to navigate difficult conversations, how to think about an upcoming performance review or something along those lines where it's a much easier conversation to be had in person, but we haven't really figured out the playbook to really be able to dial that in a remote hybrid setting. And that's something that we've seen a lot of businesses dealing with today. So kind of that newer manager and how do they manage in this remote hybrid environment?
Yeah, and thinking about just like some of like the external world, not even like what's happening within the company, right? You think
Yeah.
about like the last couple of years, there was COVID, there's these like economic uncertainties today, there's a question mark whether companies are going back full time or remote, and like what's the policy for that? Like,
Yeah.
just curious, what are your coaches saying, just so people have something to take away from this? Like, how do you deal with all that uncertainty? Because I feel like it's just one thing after another, and who knows what's coming down the line. But just curious, like any just like practical ways to deal with that uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we've heard from our coaches is just kind of controlling what's within your control. And the
Yeah.
reality is that this is life. Like there's always going to be uncertainties. There's always going to be something that you can look to in your life to say, well, this just happened, so I have this uncertainty. And whether it be more bigger picture or more personalized to you, there's always going to be something. So how can you look at that as an opportunity for growth and really see just kind of changing your perspective from, oh, this is another piece of uncertainty, to how can I change my perspective to look at this as an opportunity for growth, and how can I control what's within my control? I think those are really the two things that we've heard most frequently from our coaches. And I think the cool thing about it is that when you are talking to a Boone coach, they will actually be able to talk you through, okay, here is the specific challenge that you're dealing with, Ryan. Let's put together a plan to get you from point A to point B on steps you can actually incorporate into your day-to-day life, like you're talking about. So that's been, I think, the biggest thing for us, just kind of the bigger themes, but then also being able to actually incorporate it into the day-to-day lives of the employees we're working with.
So, Alex, one of the things that seems super interesting is that, like, I feel like everyone should have Boone or some type of service provider, right? Because every employer has health insurance. So, like,
Yeah.
you're taking care of your physical health. Like, why aren't you taking care of your mental health of your employees? Curious from an employer standpoint, like, not to make it so transactional, but like, how are employers viewing success, with Boone?
It's funny, we actually just did a customer discovery initiative where we were targeting current customers, HR consultants, insurance brokers, and then potential prospects, kind of a combination of HR leaders, CEOs, decision makers who are really thinking about making these sorts of purchases for their businesses, and then also the people who are actually working with Boone today. And we found that the biggest thing that they are thinking about in terms of success is utilization. So are employees taking advantage of this benefit, which is I found to be really interesting. That was above ROI, that was above client satisfaction, and any of the metrics in terms of dollars saved for the organization. It was really mostly about utilization. And I just thought that was really interesting and also kind of symbolic of the current benefits environment, where a lot of conversations we're having with HR leaders today are, well, I don't want to get burned by another benefit that my people don't take advantage of. So there's been this theme of like, we're throwing all of these benefits at our people and they're not taking advantage of them. So how do we think about actually having something that my people are using and that is also
Yeah.
impactful? So that has been far and away the number one thing for us is this being utilized? And for us, on average, we're getting 40 to 50% of a company to sign up when they're bringing on Boone. So that's been very aligned with what we're seeing. And we're seeing about
Yeah.
30% of a company consistently use Boone over time. So I would say utilization, and then less so employee satisfaction. Are they continuing to use it over time? And then different ROI metrics. So we're tracking employee retention metrics, employee productivity, work satisfaction, work-life balance, but utilization seems to be the primary measure right now.
Cool. Makes sense. Just shifting off of Boone for a second. I mean, you started a mental health company, which I think is like so important. Curious how does Alex take care of his mental health? Like, what do you think about from a day-to-day perspective? And just curious of like, yeah, what's Alex's strategies?
Yeah, well, to be clear, I struggle with my mental health every single day, and I think even after incorporating and being super intentional about thinking about, okay, what are the pieces of how I'm going to take care of my mental health on a day-to-day basis. Even with all of that, I still struggle, and the struggles of being a founder and an entrepreneur. I think it's kind of impossible to escape. I'm sure you can relate to that a bit, Ryan. But I think for me, I've tried to think about a couple of different pillars in terms of how I can find balance and take care of my mental health. The big things for me are I have to be working out. I've always been a big athlete. So I think
Yeah.
being in that sort of competitive spirit, but also just being able to break a sweat and exercise consistently is huge for me. Uh, Getting a good night's sleep, which can be difficult when you're a founder and
Yeah.
trying to make everything work. And then I have kind of a regularly scheduled therapy and coaching. So I view those in slightly different buckets, where I view therapy more through the lens of like more processing childhood thoughts and behaviors, and understanding how that shapes you into who you are today, much more processing oriented. Whereas my coaching has been much more focused on this kind of personal professional intersection, where it's, hey, here are the actual tangible challenges that I'm dealing with in the workplace, personally or professionally. Here's kind of a plan or a game plan to get from point A to point B. So it's much more solution focused and goal oriented. So I kind of look at it as exercise, sleep, therapy, coaching. Those are my kind of four pillars. And it's hard to stay consistent with it. It's easy to write it down,
Yeah.
but how do you stay committed to it on a day-to-day basis? I think that's something that we all struggle with, but do the best I can.
Makes sense. And curious, when you talked about therapy and coaching, do you have two different individuals for that, or is that one person and you're kind of like breaking those sessions apart?
Yeah, so I actually do have two individuals for
Yeah.
that. It's actually really interesting because we've actually seen this big shift at Boone, where we actually have several former therapists who are actually trained as therapists, who then got trained as a coach. So they're able to maybe blend that line between therapy and coaching a bit more. The therapist that I see is actually she's just a trained, she's actually a PhD in psychology. So she's a PsyD. So she has more of that traditional therapy background. And then
Yeah.
the coach is more of that coaching type background. So two separate individuals, but we have seen people kind of blend those two.
Yeah, I think it's just so interesting because I think there used to be, and I think the world is coming around to this. There used to be this weird like stigma around like
Yeah.
therapy, but it's not always because something is bad. It is because like, how do you just want to get better, right? And if
Yes.
you think about an athlete and stuff like that, professional athletes don't just go out onto the field. They have nutritionists, they have strength coach, they have mental coaches. So it's just like, how
Yeah.
are you going to level up your game? Which I think is like
Yep.
super interesting. So one of the things, Alex, I know that you're like a recent dad. Curious, when you think about like your mental health, like has anything changed about like your perspective, one, of your mental health, your work, your life, since having like a little child?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for me, and I think this is finding balance. And I think there are so many different definitions of like what is work-life balance.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of thinking about how I'm interpreting that in my day-to-day life. And I think what I've really come to is like, I'm going to be working a lot more than the average individual, and I'm totally okay with that. So I think it's more of this idea of like work life integration, and
Yeah.
what is that? And I think Jeff Bezos was actually the one who initially coined that. But how do you incorporate your work life and your personal life the most seamlessly? And then even more than that, what I think it really means is like, how can you be present in your personal life and not just be there, but how can you actually mentally be present with your family? And how can you be intentional about really being there for all of the things? Because I mean, to me, that is the most important thing in life is actually being able to be a good husband, be a good dad, and be there
Yeah.
for my family. But I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is how can I be present in those moments when I have all of these other stresses that are beneath me? So I think it's really being intentional about being present for those important moments. And I think that has just been kind of amplified through being a father. So that's been my biggest finding so far.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think being present is such a simple but such a hard thing. Anyways, like okay, you average day, you finish work, like you're going to spend time with your wife, your little one, and stuff like that. Like, how do you got all of this stuff that's just happening at work, and you kind of need to like
Yeah.
close that door, even if it's for just a couple hours, and then maybe you reopen it at night. Like, how do you just get in the zone of just like being present when you're with your family?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard. And the thing that I've tried to do just to like again, being super intentional about everything that you're
Yeah.
doing, I've actually just blocked off my calendar Monday through Friday from 6:30 to 8:30. This is designated family time on my calendar. No
Yeah.
meetings during this time. I'm going to have dinner with my family. I'm going to put my daughter to bed. This is time that I'm going to be spending with my wife and my daughter. And I think that to me has been like the biggest tangible thing that I've incorporated into my life, which I think has been super effective. But even if I am actually physically spending that time from 6:30 to 8:30, it still can be extremely challenging to think about, okay, well, at 8:31 I have to go rip off 21
Yeah.
emails before the end of the night or
Yeah.
whatever it is. So it's really again, it's just that challenge between actually being there physically and then actually being present.
Yeah, because those are very two different things. Like you can be there physically, but like not mentally be there, or just like not enjoying the time. One of the things that I've tried to do recently is so like yeah, I think no meetings during that time obviously is great too.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found myself doing is I'm always like checking my emails or checking Slack. Did this contract come through? Did someone respond to my email? So for those couple hours a day, I actually go onto my phone, even though this might sound super weird, and I actually sign out of those apps. And like I can take a break from my emails. I can take a break from Slack for a couple hours. Like I'm not saving lives in my business. And so just wanted to
Yeah.
be like really present with my family because again, it's literally only a couple hours because our little ones go to sleep at like 7:30, 8 o'clock too. So it's
Yeah.
just how can you have those 2 hours, but like be really intentional about that time. So I think that makes a ton of sense.
I like that. And something that I've actually had to do recently, which is kind of interesting because it's my current news source, but also
Yeah.
I just found myself doomsday scrolling for hours at a time at Twitter, now X. And I recently just deleted Twitter. I was like, I got to get off this for a couple of months because this is just
Yeah.
it's just taking up so much time, and the pros and cons of the increased knowledge that I'm gaining from this versus the potential toll on my mental health and just inability to be present where I'm just like constantly flickering onto my phone and starting to scroll. So that was another thing. I think just eliminating as much social media as possible, especially during those times.
Yeah. Last couple just questions for you is when you're thinking about like this work life integration and finding balance, you talked about your family, working out, work. Like what are the other important pillars that are like super important to Alex? And then the second part of it is like, have you found yourself like, holy shit, I feel out of balance? And then like, how do you bring yourself back into those, moments of like, all right, now I feel a little bit better.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, family comes above all else. And then I think for me, it's really just about how can I take care of my family? How can I take care of myself? How can I take care of Boone?
Yeah.
And then also I think just like thinking about our overall purpose at Boone of like trying to make investing in yourself personally and professionally more accessible to the masses. I mean, that plays a very big role in my life. And so it's funny, we actually did as a team at Boone, we actually did a strengths finders assessment through
Cool.
Gallup, and my number one strength was achiever. And I just thought it was really interesting, where it was just kind of symbolic of kind of my constant need for achievement, but also kind of tying into my high work ethic. But it also leads to a very stressful day-to-day life. So it's like, how do you balance all of these things? And so for me, it's just really been about just being intentional about investing in each of these areas, and really just finding a way to be able to step back consistently and know that in order to fulfill each of these categories, you really have to be intentional about spending time in each of them. And then at the end of the day, you are going to be out of balance, but I think there's an idea of acceptance, and like it's okay. I think for me, sometimes I'm my harshest own critic. So if I am out of balance, it's, well, you got lazy, you didn't work out, you didn't,
Yeah.
you kind of, you forgot to be committed, or whatever it is. And I think that's the part that gets the hardest, is like you go and you spiral. And then once you start spiraling, it becomes more and more difficult to just get back into that kind of Zen balanced mindset. And so I think for me, it's just, what can I control? I know that there are certain things in my life that lead me to this work life integration. So how can I do
Yeah.
the best job possible of, controlling the inputs when I have some idea of what the outputs are going to be?
Cool. Last question for you, and I actually want to share like a struggle that like I'm having right now, and so curious on like how you would think about this is, and you
Yeah.
can take this from like a work standpoint or a life perspective. I think something that we might have in common, Alex, is like, one, we both like are hard workers. We're both smart, but some of the things that like I question myself sometimes is like, am I focusing on the right thing? And so like, whether it's a business priority, whether it's a life priority and stuff like that. Because like, I know I will put in the work. I know that I will put in the time, and I feel like I'm somewhat smart, not the smartest person in the room, but like, how do I know those are like the right initiatives? And like, I'm going in the right direction, because again, I will push forward, but is it the right direction to push forward? So curious, and just like, how do you figure out like what are the right directions, whether it's work, life, and just giving that like insurance to yourself to being like, all right, I'm focusing on the right thing, because I think we're both willing to put in the work, if that makes sense.
100%. And I mean, I think in this economic environment, from a work perspective, I think it's becoming that much more critical to be focused on the right priorities, right? And can't be everything to everybody, and that's true in your personal life too.
Yeah.
I think what I've really tried to lean on is like, how can I surround myself with the best support system possible,
Yeah.
where I have trusted mentors, I have trusted people in my life that I can talk to personally and professionally. I mean, my wife is my number one confidant about a lot of different things, and I trust her intuition and her insight about pretty much everything. So I think like
Yeah.
finding those people in your life that you can turn to, and really, I mean, sometimes all it takes is like a little bit of validation to just know that you are moving in the right direction. And I think, particularly being a founder, I know how lonely it can feel, and
Yeah.
you feel like nobody can really relate to what you're going through in that moment, even if you are getting that validation. So I think it's just, how can you surround yourself with as many people in your life that you feel like have as much expertise as possible in that specific area. So, and I think that's something that I'm still trying to figure out more on the professional side, is like, what does my, personal board of directors look like?
Yeah.
And how do I think about that on a day-to-day basis? Because I do totally agree with you. It's just, you think about how many companies have pivoted to AI in the last 6 to 12 months. It seems like every other business is changing their company name to .ai, and it makes you feel like, well, what should I be doing in that area? How should I be incorporating that into my business? Or, there are countless other examples of that. But at the end of the day, it's like, how do I stay focused on what I need to focus on, and how can I make sure that I'm doing the right things? So I think it's just finding the right people in your life that you can turn to, and really feeling confident in going to those people.
Yeah, totally. It's having that, I'll use your words, that board of directors or that council for yourself individually, and just being like, can we talk about professional stuff? Can we talk about life stuff? Can we talk about eating? Can we talk about work life? And it's not talking about these things because things are bad. It's talking about these things to how can you improve? And like you've said it, I think like 10 times in the last like 20 minutes, Boone, yourself, it's all about just like investing in yourself, and you want to invest in yourself so you can be a better husband, a better dad, and like all of these other things. And so cool, Alex, we could spend the next like 7 hours chatting with each other because I always just personally enjoy it. So just appreciate your time today. And yeah, if people want to get a hold of you, Alex, or Boone, where would they find you?
Yeah, I guess the best way to find me, you can either find me on LinkedIn, or you can just shoot me an email at asimmons@boone-health.com. Or come to our company website at boone-health.com, and looking forward to connecting. Appreciate your time,
Alex.
Ryan.
Yeah, thanks again, my friend. Always great chatting.